G'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Never been better, Pietro. How are you?
Never been better. Wow, that's a big call. I'm pretty good. Very excited. We say this all the time, very excited, but truly very, very excited today to welcome an international guest to the show. He was the 2020 US vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. He's the founder of youarethepeople.net, which is a libertarian activism group. And he's an all-round troller of governments online and in person. If you haven't worked out who it is yet, then I won't keep you in suspense any longer. I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Spike Cohen. How are you, Spike?
I'm doing great, Pietro. Good to see you again, man.
Likewise, yeah. So I met with Spike and David at Parliament, and we filmed an episode there. But we've got Spike all to ourselves this time, which is
Yes, yes.
fantastic. Um, my first thing I was really interested in asking you was all-round troller of governments. What does that mean exactly?
I don't know. Was that handed to you as my official bio, or
No,
I mean,
no,
it's
no.
true.
I'd heard you were an all-round troller of governments.
No, that's true. Yeah, no, it is true.
Yeah. So what does that entail?
But that pretty much. So it's interesting because this is something I've been doing for a few years now. It started to catch on when I started podcasting back in 2018, and I guess I started building a bit of a following, and then my comments in anger, my shaking my digital fist at various government agencies and corporate media outlets and so forth started to catch some of momentum behind it. And then of course once I ran for VP and had a much larger following, then it just sort of took off from there. And I'd always wanted to channel the anger and energy that people had basically in the comments section, that there were all these people that were very upset about things that were going on, but then there wasn't really any viable path of or blueprint of what we were going to do from there. And that's actually what You Are the Power started with, was the idea that all these people are upset about these different things. And if you went to each one of them, you'd probably see that they're across the political spectrum. They may disagree on all sorts of different issues, but they agree on this one thing. What if we could harness that and actually do some good with it? And that's what we do with You Are the Power. We find incidents of people who are being disrespected as human beings by the human beings that make up their governments, and we organize other human beings to work with them and to get justice and respect for them. And we're actually starting a You Are the Power chapter in Australia. So stay tuned for that.
I had heard that. That's super exciting, and I guess it kind of plays into the whole. Often when you're looking at comments of things that you find outrageous, so many of the comments seem to agree with you, but
Yes.
the powers that be continue to move in the directions that are completely antithetical to what everyone seems to agree with. So is that kind of the point of You Are the Power, to funnel that into something that can make some change?
Absolutely, especially because the reason that politicians are able to get away with that largely fall into two main reasons. They keep everyone divided so that those people might agree on this thing, but then when it comes to actually taking an action, they fall into their various partisan camps, their racial camps, their ethnic camps, their geographical camps, how they think about other issues that have nothing to do with this one. They keep every one of us divided as much as possible on as many possible things, so we can't unify and defeat them. The other thing is, partially as a result of that, people feel powerless. They feel like all they can do is go in the comment section and complain about it, and that's why they do it. But if we can show them that there is an actual viable path to fixing these problems and to holding the people that did them accountable, then we can start getting somewhere. We're focused on local right now. I'll troll agencies at every level of government, and I don't even stick to my own country. I've trolled Dan Andrews and Justin Trudeau, and I tend to stay in the Anglosphere because I don't speak other languages. But if someone can translate it for me, I'll go after anyone. But if we can show people that even at the local level, they can start making change, and that they don't just have to. I mean, I'm not going to say stop trolling agencies. We have a shirt that says cyberbully the government. I'm all for that. But you don't only have to do that. There's plenty we can do to actually put an end to this.
What would you say were a couple of your favorite wins in using those tactics and in that realm there?
The first one that just came to mind now was we had in Dallas, Texas, we had an incident where a young couple a married couple had a child, newborn baby. They had a child, I think either one or two children before, and they had those children in a hospital. They didn't want to do that this time, so they had a home birth using a midwife, and their pediatrician didn't like that. And so the pediatrician called CPS, Child Protective Services. I'm not sure what they call that there, but called the people in charge of making sure that child abuse isn't happening, and reported that they were neglecting the child. They called at midnight. A few hours later, they were at the parents' home, detained the parents, took this newborn, few-day-old baby from them for weeks. And, there were other groups that were involved that were fighting for this. We found out about it. We started a campaign of basically cyberbullying all the agencies involved and the police department that was involved. And within a few days, baby Mila was returned to her family. This was, an incident where we didn't even have to do rallies or protests or anything else. It was really just beating up on the people. It's amazing what happens when suddenly people's email inboxes and voicemail inboxes are filled with people saying, hey, what are you doing? Do this instead. So that was a big one. I've got a few like that, but that was just the first that popped in my head.
I know government agencies aren't strong in the logic department, but who in their right mind would think that taking a 2-day-old baby away from their parents is safer than a home birth? It's crazy.
Metrics. So the problem with government, Max, is that it has very often a perverse incentive for problems to be created or made worse. And so is that logical? No, but if you look at it if you look through the filter of how can we increase our metrics to make it look like we're doing something while simultaneously putting people in a desperate situation? Well, now what they did made perfect sense. It's not good sense. It's actually a very evil and horrific thing. But government is this sort of weird mix of malice and ineptitude, which feeds into perverse incentives to do the wrong thing. And this is a perfect example of that. No one in their right mind thought for a second that taking this newborn child was a good idea. And even if the doctor had lied and CPS erred on the side of caution because they heard that there was some kind of abuse or neglect happening, and they seized the child, temporarily, and within a matter of, hours or before they even left the scene, realized there was nothing here, then I'd say, okay, you know what? I think it's a little overbearing, but at least they understood there was no problem. Weeks. And that's because of bureaucracy, ineptitude, and perverse incentives.
That rings so true, even paralleling it to, and I imagine this is a lot of what happened with the US as well. Here, we've all got PTSD from COVID and what's happened during COVID.
Yeah.
But that whole combination of perverse incentives and the fact that it's never as politically costly to err on the side of caution. Here we saw it on, the heavy-handed lockdowns was out of an abundance of, safety and abundance of caution. And that was always more politically viable than, hey, let's trust people because that's when you can bring in all the fear-mongering that the government wants, and the government's never going to choose to not give itself power. So there's that combination right there.
Yeah, they don't have a real upside to erring on the side of freedom. I'll give you another example, which is a much more immediate and visceral. Let's say you have a judge, or I should say acute, it's more on an individual level. Let's say you have a judge who has 100 cases in front of him. And he says, you know what, I'm going to, everyone makes mistakes. I'm going to give people a chance. And so he's more lenient on sentencing, or he focuses the sentencing on restorative justice instead of punitive justice. Instead of throwing them in prison for making a mistake, I'm going to, give them make them do community service, make them restore the the cost to the person that they robbed if that was the situation, or these weren't really violent cases. These were simple theft or even like a simple assault. They need to take anger management. I'm going to try to get them to learn from this and build from it, instead of sticking them with a criminal record and putting them in prison and ruining their life for many years to come, or maybe even the rest of their life. Now, if out of those 100 people, or even out of those, let's say it's 1,000, out of those 1,000 people, if 999 of them go on to become productive members of society who never do anything wrong again, or, they don't really, they never have any serious issues or whatever, that doesn't make the headlines. What makes the headlines is the one that goes and, God forbid, rapes someone or kills someone or something like that. Even if that person was always going to do that, it had nothing to do with this, judge trying to err on the side of giving them their freedom and giving them an opportunity to not make that mistake again. What we're going to hear is lenient judge causes rapes and murders. And so now you've got judges erring on the side of giving the maximum. And we're hearing this over and over again in areas that are getting rid of cash bail and are leaving it up to the judge to decide whether or not to let this person out on their own recognizance. The judges are in almost every case saying, no, they have to stay in for the maximum amount of time that I can keep them in there, because they don't want it coming back on them. So again, it's a perverse incentive to do things that on the whole are broadly damaging to our lives and our rights and our liberties.
Yeah, it seems like there's and again, I speak mostly from my Australian experience, but it seems like the idea of valuing freedom in any sense has kind of taken a step back in a lot of the average person's psyche. We kept hearing this phrase here, like, even if it saves one life, it's worth it. Even if it's, which is okay. That sounds really nice. It sounds really nice. Hey, let's save everyone. But it's an asinine idea that we don't actually apply to the rest of our lives. Even if it saves one life, okay, people die in car crashes all the time. If we banned every car, we would save so many lives. But it's absurd, and yet it was literally the policy applied, and it was the talking points of the news reporters, as well as their minions on the ground, the ones that walk among us, and those were the talking points. Even if it saves one life, and I feel like that weighting of freedom versus life is one that has lost the original meaning on which our society is founded for most of us, or for a lot of people. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I've actually been watching Battleground Melbourne, and to watch this, in very rapid succession, you're watching this progression from, well, we're not going to be able to stop all COVID, but we just got to try to keep that. And it was the same thing we were hearing here, although it was kind of more extreme there. But it was that same kind of narrative going from, listen, this thing's very virulent. We're just trying to get a hold of this. We're just, it's very early on. We're trying to figure out just how serious this is. But in the meantime, we're going to introduce some restrictions to, just try to keep that spread slowed. Slow the spread meant, have it so that the hospitals aren't packed with people that are dying. So, keep that rate of spread. But slow the spread inherently, it implicitly demonstrates that they understand you're not going to stop it. You can just slow how long it takes for us to reach herd immunity with these measures. Now, putting aside the fact that very early on we found out these measures don't really do that. The only way you can truly slow the spread is by doing what China did and welding people's apartment doors shut, which ultimately causes far more harm than the virus itself could ever do. I mean, we'll never know how many more people died as a result of that, not to mention all the livelihoods being destroyed as a result. But, if you let people go outside at all, there is no slowing the spread on something this virulent. And of course, you can't go even more restrictive. It was already harmful to begin with. But they went from, rather than say, and again, this goes back to a problem with government, rather than go, you know what, this isn't working. We're not going to slow the spread, and we're not going to do any more damage to people's lives, to children's education, to our economy, to people's jobs, to things, people's small businesses. We're not going to do this. This is going to cause all sorts of problems. The supply chain is going to be wrecked for years and decades to come. We're just going to have to reopen, and we're going to give the data that we have as best as we can, but we need people to understand this is going to be serious, and to please take it as seriously as possible, and please stay updated with whatever guidance we can give, and to just use your best judgment. That would have probably seen the same rate of spread that we ended up seeing with the lockdowns. Instead, they went, no, Zero COVID. Now, that was insane enough in Australia, which is an island which can shut off all incoming and outgoing traffic. That's still insane there. They were saying that here, while not fully shutting down incoming and outgoing traffic in a country of 350 million people with giant porous land borders that is not in any way an island. And they were still talking about, we're going to try to get rid of this thing. It was like, that's not real. There's never been a highly virulent respiratory virus that has gone away due to mitigation efforts. It's always been from a combination of herd immunity, of enough people getting immune where it just doesn't spread that much anymore, and the virus itself mutating to a point where it's not really that big of a threat to us anymore. And that's literally what ended up happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the COVID zero stuff here was also insane. The most insane part was that I think if you ask people now about the COVID zero, a lot of people here will continue to maintain that yes, it worked and that was the correct move to make, because there were a couple of times where we were at 500 cases a day where they did one of those harsh lockdowns, and over the course of a couple of months we got to zero.
Yeah.
But then what? Then we opened up and they grew. Like there was
yes.
What even is the justification?
There were also times when we had 0 cases in Australia and there was still harsh restrictions.
Yeah. And what's wild about that is, first of all, we now have the benefit of data from places like Sweden and certain states in the US that had little to no lockdowns, and other places that had little to no lockdowns.
But we had that data. We had that data while we were doing our lockdown. So sorry, because I remember the Tom Woods graphs on like which states were doing better, and you couldn't guess which states. We had that data while we were doing the lockdown. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. I got news for everyone, folks. This thing spreads pretty easily. At some point, maybe even from the beginning, it was airborne. It was going to go up, and then it reach a certain level of herd immunity and then start going back down, and then it would mutate and go back up and go down, and all like that was always going to happen. And so the government, knowing again, these are health experts who know this stuff. They knew that it would have this pattern. So when it would go up, they'd say, we're going to introduce these restrictions, knowing it was going to go down anyway. And then they go, look, the restrictions worked, and it was bullshit. It was, I'm sorry, can we swear?
Yeah,
please.
Yeah.
It was bullshit. And the whole thing was just absurd. And you feel at times like you're yelling into a void. I'm running for vice president at the time and saying this stuff in front of media, in front of reporters, in front of interviewers. And I'm saying this, and they're looking at me stone-faced because I'm the first person to say this to them. And it so completely goes against what everyone has been saying to them. And yet they know it's true. I'm like, look at cold and flu season. Like every time it goes up and then it goes back down. Why? Because that's the nature of these highly virulent pathogens. They burn through people and then they start to go down again. We don't lock down during flu season. There's no reason for it.
But Spike, with COVID, the politicians put harsh restrictions on us. They saved our lives.
Yes, no, I know that. I mean, that aside, of course.
If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here doing this podcast right now.
We'd literally all be dead. Yes, we'd all be dead. No, that's true. That's a good point.
It's a weird case of like the idea of the emperor has no clothes. When you're the first one to say these things, it's like you're the first one to point out. And I mean, now it's so patently obvious. The emperor has never had any clothes, but it really was that sort of feeling, that sort of moment then.
When I made my first anti-lockdown video, it was in March of 2020. And the lockdowns hadn't even gotten here yet. I do believe we had started having some you couldn't have big gatherings of more than 500 people or something like that. I honestly don't remember that. It was either just before or just during that. It was before the actual lockdown orders started happening here in the States. But it was in reaction to what I was seeing in China and in South Korea and in Europe, especially in Italy and France. And I said, oh, this is coming here. we're literally, it's going to come here. There's nothing. Our so-called experts are already saying that this is, needed here. We're literally going to do this. Donald Trump is, side by side with Anthony Fauci. I know the revisionist history is that wasn't the case, but we have video and picture of it. It is what it is. And so I'm like, that's coming here. And so I made a video explaining why lockdowns weren't going to work. I didn't even try to make the constitutional argument or the rights argument, or I just said, listen, it doesn't work. And I explained why cold and flu season is when the cold and flu spread the most. It's not because it's cold out. The cold causes us to stay in our poorly ventilated homes more often, venturing out of them only to go to the exact same places that everyone else is going to during the exact same times everyone is going to, and spreading their germs to each other, going right back to their poorly ventilated homes to spread all those germs to everyone else. They're not going outside and getting sunshine and vitamin D, which kills pathogens on their skin and on their clothes. They're not getting as much exercise as they would, which is good for their immune system. They're not doing a variety of different activities, which spreads people out so that it's harder for viruses to spread in these smaller groupings. They're more stressed out. Well, here it's the holiday season during the winter. It's not there, but the holiday season makes people more stressed out, and that hurts their immune system. And so what do? We introduce lockdown measures that literally recreate cold and flu season minus the cold weather. And so I'm explaining in this video why it's not going to work as they're starting to begin implementing this stuff here. And what was crazy about that was the first responses I got to that video were people going, "You idiot, that's never going to happen here." And by the time I was making my second anti-lockdown video, maybe say a week or two later, many of those same people were saying, "You idiot, if you go outside, you're going to kill my grandmother." And it was incredible to watch how quickly that narrative changed from, "That would never happen here," to, "What are you, insane?" And it was literally the same message. And, and I even said, I'm no doctor, I'm no health expert, but let's just use common sense here. We know why cold and flu season tends to be when it's colder. This creates those conditions. It's not going to work. Not only is it going to cause all this other ancillary damage that we are seeing, years later still playing out, but it's going to not even, the thing that they're saying it's going to happen, that it's going to affect, it's not going to affect. And it's still going to have this spread that's then going to go down, and they're going to claim that it was because of the lockdowns. And lo and behold, 3.5 years later, here we are with them trying to revise history in saying that, that it was absolutely necessary. Thankfully, I don't know about there, but in the US, the vast majority of people are at least skeptical of that. And most people just outright do not believe it. I'm not sure how it is there, but here the narrative has totally shifted to that was a bad idea.
I feel like over here, there's a huge divide. You're either really skeptical or you are fully on board. There's not enough people in between who are sort of like maybe on that journey of questioning. It's sort of like you're either firmly believed or you are still thinking that you need to go get your 6th booster and follow all the restrictions, and the government is your daddy.
Yeah, well, and that's, we do have some of that, but I will say that like the broad center is people going, I don't know what I thought about that. And I'm not sure that was a good idea, which is wild because our lockdowns were nowhere near as bad as yours were in some places.
I think the harshness of the lockdowns meant that the people because the broad center, I would assume in the US now is skeptical, but at the time was probably leaning towards, trusting the sources. 100%. Here, because the lockdowns and the measures were so harsh, and the conversations around even like vaccine mandates and stuff were so harsh, if you were in the center and you bought into all that stuff, like you've gone really far at that point, and to go back on that now takes a much bigger step and much more humility, which most people would rather not talk about it at all. And if they do talk about it, they probably default back to their original ideas that, lockdowns were good. That was all important.
That's actually a good thing to talk about, Pietro, because the reality is the more you can, and I mean, there are entire like psychological experiments they've done on this. The more you can pull people along into doing something horrific, the harder it is for them to walk it back. And if you can give them any kind of plausible, deniability that that was wrong, or plausible reason, excuse to believe that what they were doing was actually a good thing, they'll buy into it, if for no other reason than because like their entire self-worth is built around this, and they're going to have to go back and really, I mean, it's not just, here it's eating some amount of humble pie, but there it's like, yeah, I'm sorry that I wish death on millions of people, because they were skeptical of the government. And I've seen that. I've seen it. It's taken a while for some people that I know personally who were saying things like, the unvaccinated are plague rats. I don't care what happens to them. We shouldn't be allowing them in hospitals. They've had to really be very quiet. And some of them have just flat out said, I was wrong. But some of them have either doubled and tripled down and, this vaccine is the only reason I'm still alive, or they're just not saying much at all. And it was crazy to watch in real time. I was everywhere during the lockdowns. We were very often breaking the law. We were going places. We were not getting permits. We were having events outside. We were in, I would say my campaign was the most national openly violating of lockdown orders. I don't know of anyone else that was running for a national office who on a daily basis was breaking the law. And what was wild was we could not get news coverage of it, but it was like we were literally saying, like, we would announce, we'd put out on social media that we were doing these events, and we'd tag the police departments and try to let them know, like, come on out, we're not going to stop doing it. And so, and I would get loved ones and people in my circles who were messaging me going, is this okay? I'm that's a lot of people to be within 6 feet of, and I don't ever see you wearing a mask, and what's going on? And I knew that over time, just like after 9/11, just like after any major crisis, the public starts to slowly begin to realize, maybe I bought into this a little bit too much. But yeah, the further along you can get them to go, the harder it is to pull them back, because they're just so far in. It's the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, there's other stuff that we wanted to talk about other than just COVID. Sorry for unloading our PTSD about
no, that's fine.
That whole experience on you. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's also really relevant always to libertarians, because it's a blueprint of exactly how the government works. It's like on steroids how the perverse incentives work. And what is actually really heartening about a period like COVID is that it's so much more laid bare, and often you can bring people into the movement. You almost need those sort of moments to be able to showcase to the average person, because otherwise it's the slow creep of government is so much more insidious, and it's so much easier to justify to the average person with the legitimacy of these grandiose elections and stuff like that.
100%. I hope, if it's true, we already know that the US government was funding gain of function research at the Wuhan lab in China. I always call it the Wuhan lab. The Wuhan lab in China, and we know that they were humanizing and greatly increasing the function by as much as 10,000 fold of viruses that were strikingly similar, at least 96% similar to SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID. At some point, I think it is almost certain, but certainly very likely, that we're going to get that smoking gun that says COVID was one of the viruses created from this, or SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19 was created from the gain of function research. And if and when that happens, then we will have come full circle, and we'll be able to say the government, either through maliciousness or ineptitude, created a virus which has killed millions of people around the world. And instead of admitting to that, they said, stay in your house until further notice. And it's crucial that we find that piece, because right now, there are still people that go, well, maybe it wasn't the best idea, but they're still doing their best and they're trying their best. That will kill that narrative for anyone with any common sense at all. This entire thing wouldn't have happened without the government protecting us, because they were doing that to protect us. We have to create these super serious and powerful and uncontrollable viruses so we can test on them in case one like this ever appears. Oops, it leaked. Like that's just, but who else but government would do that, right? No one else
Yeah.
but government would have the unaccountability, endless budget, and perverse incentive to do something like that.
And not just whoops it leaks, whoops it leaked. You are not allowed to even suggest that it might have come from this lab. It
You
came
racist.
from the
You
wet
racist.
market
Yeah.
down the street from a pangolin.
Yes.
Obviously, it can't possibly
Yes.
have come from the lab where they were studying this exact thing. I mean, which, yeah.
I remember, I know you don't want to keep talking about COVID, but let me talk about COVID a little more. I remember the narrative of, if you suggest that this thing leaked out of a leaked out of a lab due to funding of gain of function research, you are a racist. Clearly, it's because Chinese people were eating bats. Like it was just, which of those is more racist? Like what? Anyway, but enough about COVID.
Yeah.
I've got a good subject change. Spike, normally the first question we ask our guests, which we didn't do today, is tell us about your journey to libertarianism and how you became a libertarian. Is it a recent thing?
Sure.
Has it been lifelong? And I think then please expand onto that and how you got into the position to become the vice presidential candidate.
So I'll give you the shortest version of this I can, because I'm a very, very old man and this is a long story. Looking back, well, first of all, I was born at a very young age. I think we'll start there. And then around the time I was 3 years old, my brother convinced me that Jeremy was a girl's name, like Julie or Jenny. So then I changed my name. My parents went along with it, thinking that it was a phase. I'm now 41 years old and still I'm Spike. And this began a series of demonstrations of my being a libertarian, whether or not I even knew it. I literally didn't like my name, so I insisted everyone call me Spike instead. I always was a believer in gun rights. My dad made it very clear to me growing up that, you know, I'm Jewish and you know, we have loved ones who we don't have family members that were in the Holocaust, but we had loved ones that were the survivors of people that fled the Holocaust and so forth. And you know, he said, you know, the first thing they do is disarm you. And that always made sense to me. If you don't have guns, you can't protect yourself from people who are trying to kill you. So I was always against gun control. I always had this inclination that the government shouldn't tell you what to think or what to say. I always had this inclination that, you know, if I want to take a drug or do whatever, it's not really anyone's business. I'm responsible for what happens, but I can take that. And you know, whoever you loved or wanted to, you know, have sex with or marry or whatever, like I was always kind of just a civil libertarian. I didn't necessarily have a word for it. When I was 19, I started my first business when I was 16. Again, very libertarian minded. And so I didn't want government in my life. I didn't like the taxes. I didn't like the regulations. I felt like I was being punished for making money and creating jobs and providing a service. That's stupid. Why would they do that? So I was always kind of on the libertarian side, but I consider myself not political, but I would say I was kind of liberal just because, you know, I didn't think the government should tell people what to do or say or think. And I thought that was liberal. It used to be. And so then when I was 19 years old, 9/11 happened. And I bought into the media and the corporate media and government narrative that 9/11 happened because these terrorists that just kind of appeared out of nowhere, these evil terrorists, they wanted to install an Islamic caliphate around the world, and we were in their way, and they hated us because we were just so darn free. And they never really defined what freedom meant. I guess something of having to do with like women wearing tight shorts. And I'm like, well, I'm all for that. So we have to defend women wearing booty shorts to the bitter end. And so I still believe that, but so I bought the line. And there was, you know, this is pre-social media. The internet was a thing, but it was mostly like chat boards and stuff. I wasn't really hearing anyone that didn't sound insane who was going against this narrative. Any news channel would say this, any newspaper would say this, you know, any of the main, you know, big talkers on the internet were all saying the same thing. We had to fight terrorism. We had to take it to them and everything. But there was this annoying group of people called libertarians who were saying stuff that kind of connected with me. I never connected with like the left-wing anti-war protesters who were fine with it when Clinton was doing it, but suddenly they're not because Bush is doing it. But I and then went back to being okay with it when Obama was doing it. But but these libertarians, they're like, okay, you want a smaller government that costs less, but you want a worldwide empire that's running up trillions of dollars in debt every couple of years, and you want the government to leave you alone, but you want it to be able to wiretap you and check all of your electronic communications without a warrant, and tell you, rat on you to local officials if you say something they don't like. You want it to be left alone, but you want government to be weaponized against people you disagree with if they don't like the war effort. Like all these things, and I at the time I would just reflexively think, why do these ridiculous libertarians want the terrorists to win? Why do they hate America so much? But they also made predictions. They'd say, look, if you look at the history of U.S. imperialism and of government lies and so forth, we're going to find out that we've been lied to about Afghanistan, that we've been lied to about Iraq, that there are no WMDs. Truth tellers are going to come forward with whistleblowing and with leaks. They're going to be punished incessantly for it instead of applauded for telling the truth. We're not going to be greeted as liberators. Thousands of our loved ones, maybe even tens of thousands, are going to come home in caskets and body bags. Many more are going to come home with all sorts of injuries and trauma, both interior and exterior, in their brain and in their bodies. And it's all going to end up being for naught, and it's only going to enrich the wealthy and powerful. And then it'll turn out that we've been funding the terrorists all along. And I'm like, no, this is all garbage. And then very quickly, their predictions just started coming true, one after the next. And I was angry, and I realized I was angry because I was wrong. And obviously the best way to fix that is to stop being wrong. And so I thought, okay, I got here pretty ad hoc. I need to come up with what it is I actually believe. And I read everything from Mises to Marx and everything in between. And I settled on libertarianism. And over time, shortly after, I was definitely that 6-month guy, settled into anarcho-capitalism. And now, if you asked me, did I settle on libertarianism solely because it turned out to be the most logical thing I read, or if it was as a result of the fact that they were the ones that reached me first with a message that made sense? I'd love to say it was just because it was the most logical thing that made sense, but I'd be lying if I said that the fact that it was libertarians who reached out to me first and made the most sense to me wasn't a factor. Now, maybe they reached out to me first and made the most sense because they're the most logical, but whatever it is, it demonstrated to me that something that I had learned in the business world. You can't just tell people what's wrong. You have to give them a solution. You don't just make more sense than anyone else. You propose an alternative. Libertarians weren't just saying this was all wrong. They were proposing a non-interventionist policy. They were proposing free trade. They were proposing friendship and trade instead of war. They were proposing dismantling the military-industrial complex and the surveillance state and giving us our civil liberties back. They were proposing a return to sound money and ending the Fed. They were proposing eliminating the IRS and ending taxation. They were proposing things and demonstrating that what the benefits were and contrasting them what the harm of the status quo is. And so I realized, many years later, when I decided to retire from my work, I'd made enough money where I didn't have to keep putting my nose to the grindstone for the rest of my life. So I started podcasting and talking about these ideas and applying what I had learned in the world of sales and marketing to messaging libertarianism. I apparently did a pretty good job at it because I was asked to run for the vice presidential nomination. I did not think I was going to get it. I was a relative unknown in the party and to the public, but I figured I'd use it as an opportunity to talk about how I thought we could be better spreading the message of liberty. I must have done a good job at it because they picked me. And the rest is history.
Well, let me stick there for a second, because the libertarian candidacy, I think, is something that was really interesting, and US politics in general. If we can talk about that for a little bit, like, as much as Australia, we like to talk, let's not talk about US politics and that kind of thing. It's ridiculous to assert that we don't follow along, and in many ways, policy that you guys make also comes down to us, especially
yes,
economic policy, especially Federal Reserve stuff, which we just copy outright. So the first question I wanted to ask was, I think the Ron Paul, and there's a lot of those kind of libertarians who were really, really inspirational. The Libertarian Party itself, barring this vice presidential candidate at the last one, which I quite liked, Gary Johnson, Joe Jorgensen were a much milder, less kind of inspiring personalities to someone, like to me personally, and nothing against them, but I think, you know, the idea of a libertarian in a world that is the biggest state of all time, the libertarian needs to be someone outspoken and angry, and not angry necessarily, but outspoken and with a really controversial message in a way.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go.
So I agree with that. I don't have anything necessarily against Gary or Joe. Gary and Joe and Bill Barr before, or Bob Barr. Yeah, Bob Barr before Gary. These were all this attempt to rebrand the Libertarian Party as electable. And the idea behind that was, well, you know, our candidates aren't really taking off because voters are looking at them and saying that, well, it's not like they're going to get elected. And so they thought, well, what we'll do is we'll find these people that either have been elected officials or have more of a moderate demeanor, and we'll say, well, these people are electable. You can elect them. The problem is they're not saying these candidates aren't electable because I don't think these individual candidates can win. What they're saying is, I don't think your candidates are electable because we have a two-party first past the post system, and I'm not going to vote for this one, even if this makes more sense to me, because this one I see as the lesser evil to this one. And if I'm afraid if I vote for you instead of this one, then this one's going to win, and then I'll lose even more than I would if this one wins, even though I know I'll lose even if this one wins. And that's what they're saying. And so in that kind of an environment where we know that it will be a major victory the first time that we get 5%, yes, we should still run serious candidates who, if they win, would be able to do the job, because God forbid they win and suck. That'll be the worst thing that ever happened. But we also need to be electing people without trying to, like, we need to stop picking people that might be good choices if we're somewhat ahead in the polls by 2 or 3 points and we don't want to rock the boat by too much. We're not going to win until we build a movement around a serious, stark contrast from the status quo. And so I think it's crucial that, yes, we have to pick people who have demonstrated professionalism. And we do have to pick people, and not just for president, for governor, for Senate, for any of these races. We need to pick people who, yeah, if they got elected, it looked like they could actually do that job. But we need to pick people who inspire people. We cannot show up and say, hey, you know those two parties you really hate? We got this guy over here, and he's as much as 15% better. You're going to love him. He's great. He's not going to win. He is not going to win. But he is just, I mean, he has his moments. But
imagine if he won.
But imagine if he did win. He's not going to, but imagine if he did win, he could be double digits better than the other two. That's not inspiring anyone. They're not even going to look at it, and the media is not going to pay attention to it. You have to bring someone to the table who is a firebrand. They don't have to be insane. I'm not saying to find the craziest person you can, but you have to find someone that's going to inspire people. People come to their speeches and come to their events and come to watch their debates and watch their town halls, and they walk away electrified. They walk away saying, finally, someone who's been saying what I haven't even been able to fully articulate in my own head. That needs to happen. When that happens, then you can build a movement that can actually get elected past the local level. We're able to get people, we've gotten hundreds of libertarians elected at the city and county level, right? And we've had a handful of state legislators. If we're ever going to work our way up to statewide races like governor and secretary of state and stuff like that, much less Congress, Senate, president, we've got to build a movement of people who the new binary to them isn't Republican and Democrat. It's the status quo and this new thing called libertarianism that makes so much more sense than the status quo. And we need to say, we have to recognize Deboucher's law is real. It is going to be a binary choice, as long as we have first past the post politics. And so we need to recreate a binary that makes more sense. It's not red flavored tyranny versus blue flavored tyranny. It's any flavor of tyranny, the status quo, versus what we present with libertarianism. And we need people that electrify people behind that.
Yeah, and I think Tom Woods talks about the status quo bias, which is something that's so hard to break out of, because I mean, how can you expect someone who has grown up and their whole existence, their whole world is based on what they currently know? How can you expect them to break out of that? Like it's an unrealistic demand to make of someone without giving them a truly inspirational or different or without some work. So it takes work. You can't just we can't just be, the angry libertarians. Why doesn't everyone agree with us? Well, it's obvious. It's obvious. They grew up in the world that they grew up in. I mean, I wasn't a libertarian for a great number of years at the beginning, because I grew up in the world I grew up in. So yeah, I do agree. The end of the question that I was going to ask you is, given that I find someone like you to be that inspirational personality that can articulate things that I haven't thought of yet. I also Dave Smith, I'm a big fan of, who does the same thing. I was wondering whether you had any gossip or any insight as to who the Libertarian presidential candidate might be in this upcoming. If you've got any insights there.
That is the most artfully coy way of asking me this question that I've heard thus far. So kudos to you for that. There are people that are running for the nomination right now. They're all friends of mine right now. The people that have announced are Lars Mapstead, Chase Oliver, Jacob Hornberger, Mike Termott, and Joshua Smith just announced. They're all friends of mine. I think they're all doing good work there. I don't know if Dave is planning on running. I don't know if, like, for example, Larry Sharp or Justin Amash is running. There's a few others that, may be in contention. I'm deciding whether I'm going to run or not. I have not ruled it out. But as you know, I am the founder and president of You Are the Power. We are doing incredible work. We've been around for just over a year, and and I'm speaking very frankly, I have to determine from let's say I were to announce that I was running for president. From that point, whenever that is, towards the end of this year, beginning of next, whatever, if I were to announce from that time to November, the first Tuesday of the month, the first Tuesday of November, from that period of time, which would be roughly a year, give or take, would my time best be spent during that time putting a good team in place at You Are the Power and making this run for president, and then assuming if I don't get elected, then going back to You Are the Power and bringing everything that I got from that to You Are the Power? Or would my time be best spent doubling, tripling down on You Are the Power and moving forward with that? I don't know the answer to that yet. And there's many other questions, smaller questions that need to be answered before I can answer that bigger question. But it all boils down to, how can I best help this movement? And fully cognizant of the fact that this movement isn't just within the borders of the U.S. Obviously, the bulk of my work is in the United States. If I'm running for president, that's obviously a very U.S.-centric thing. But I'm fully aware of the fact that this movement reverberates across the country. What you're doing in Australia is outside of just Australia. What I'm doing in the States is well outside of the States. You Are the Power is starting a chapter. In fact, you were there when that was being formed with Rick there. So I just have to determine that. And when I determine that, I will be very upfront and candid. I have no interest in being coy about it or, hiding behind the scenes until I either announce or don't. Once I know, everyone else is going to know in pretty short order after that.
Spike, one thing I really don't like about the majority of the US system when, let's say with the Democrats and the Republicans, when you've got all these nominees vying for that like presidential nomination, is that they tear each other down within their own party. Like you see Trump going hard at gone completely blank. What's his name?
Ron DeSantis?
DeSantis, yeah. You'll see Trump going so hard against him and trying to tear him down. But like they probably believe in 80 to 90% of the same things. Will we see that within the US Libertarian Party with all these people fighting for the nomination? Are they going to attack each other?
Typically we don't. just generally speaking. There have been times when people have gone kind of feral against some of the other candidates, but usually what happens, so like in 2020, there were a couple candidates who that was their strategy. They were going to go feral. They burned out very quickly. We don't like that. If you have a serious policy disagreement with someone, then that's valid. If you might even have a legitimate concern about the person's character that isn't just blatant mudslinging, it's like a serious thing that we really need to look at and talk about, then that's valid. Although you got to be careful with that, right? But the ones because we have a delegate system instead of a primary system where we are trying to convince roughly, well, half or just over half of roughly 1,000 or 1,100 delegates from across the country who are really tuned into the future of the Libertarian Party, they don't want to hear that stuff. Like, they really are not interested in that. And so that kind of informs the greater body of Libertarian Party members that we don't want to hear that. If you have a better strategy, then present it. If you have a serious policy difference with one of the other candidates that you want to contrast, then do that. But if you're going to make bad faith accusations or go after their character or just troll them or anything like that, no, that's not, I'm certainly not. I'll call that out when I see it. If I do run, I'm not running against any of my friends that are running or anyone else that's running. Because like I said, right now they're all my friends. But even if someone announced that wasn't my friend, I'm not running against them. I'm not telling you why you shouldn't vote for them. I'm not going to do negative partisanship. I would be telling you why you should pick me instead. And if you don't pick me and you pick one of these others for whatever reason that you pick, great. Here's the team I built for that. Go take them and go off and do the best that you can. And I'll be there supporting from in any capacity that you want me to. I have no interest in that. We need to save our fire for the state, not each other.
Absolutely. It goes to show just how principled the libertarian movement is.
Yep.
On the current candidates, because I mean it's given that it's so spectacular and grandiose, the US elections, we talk just as much about the US presidential candidates here as I'm sure we do about our own elections. What do you think of the kind of the big four, I guess, at the moment, the Trump, Biden, RFK, DeSantis? Are there any redeeming qualities to any of them? Do you rank any of them higher than the others, or are they all lost causes?
I mean, I'm sure if you dig enough, you'll find redeeming qualities in just about anyone. But if this is me being very literal in the question that you asked. I would say of those four, the one who has said the things that I probably agree with most would probably be Vivek Ramaswamy. But two big caveats there. Number one, Vivek is running to be Trump's vice president. Let's be very clear. I think he realizes this is Donald Trump's party for quite some time. Ron DeSantis completely bought into some really flawed polling and thought that he could just dethrone Trump. That was never going to happen even before these ridiculous indictments came out. Now that that's happened, this is Donald Trump's party until that man dies. He could go to prison for the rest of his life and would still get the Republican nomination. In fact, if anything, that would assure that he would get the Republican nomination. Like this is Donald Trump's party as long as his heart is beating, and Ron DeSantis completely screwed up there. So Vivek is running for VP. Also, even with many of the things that Vivek has said that I agree with, Vivek wants a war with Mexico. To fight the cartels. Well, first of all, the first way you can fight the cartels is to end the war on drugs, which not only dries up their black market, but also ends the DEA, which is one of their main armors and financiers. But so it shows a lack of understanding of what's actually causing the cartels to take over Mexico and the rest of Latin America is the war on drugs. But also, you don't like war? Imagine a U.S. war with a neighboring country of 100 and some odd million people, 10, 15, 20 million of whom reside within the United States, and many more of whom have direct lineage to, like, this would be like attacking like Southern California or something like that. Like, it's just some absolutely foolish idea. And of course he's saying, well, I wouldn't invade, we'd just bomb. What's that going to lead to, Vivek? So as much as I agree with some of the things he's saying, I think that's just disqualifying there. But also he's running to be Trump's VP. RFK, I like a lot of the stuff he is saying, especially when it comes to the medical industrial complex and when it comes to freedom of speech. I will not forget that, it wasn't that long ago that he was calling for people to be imprisoned for questioning the climate change narrative. And even more recently, I remember when I was, going around the country running for VP and in open defiance of lockdown orders and hearing the stories from people across the country of people's lives just being ruined by these destructive, terrible lockdowns and mandates. And RFK was on Twitter saying that they should be extended because they're good for the climate. But that aside, in more recent times, even if he's just pandering, I like what he's saying. He's at least getting it said to an audience that usually wouldn't hear this from Democratic Party politicians. And above all, anything that upsets, the already concluded process of Joe Biden being renominated for the Democrat nomination this year, I'm all for it. But the one caveat I would say there is, we've seen this before with anti-establishment Democrat candidates. We've seen this with Tulsi. We've seen this with Tulsi Gabbard. We've seen this with Bernie Sanders. Before that, we saw that with Howard Dean, Dennis Kucinich. We've seen this before. In fact, Dennis Kucinich is RFK Jr.'s campaign manager. And what we see is we have this anti-establishment Democrat who's saying a lot of things that people on the right, the left, and the center recognize to be true. And most importantly, attacking the heart of the DNC establishment. They're saying that this is not what Democratic voters want. This is everything that we are voting against, and it's a giant corporatist system, and it doesn't serve us. That's great that they say that, but we also see what happens every time with anti-establishment candidates. They get railroaded by the DNC, the establishment candidate gets picked, and then they endorse that establishment candidate every time. And not only do they endorse them, they hand over their mailing lists. Whatever money is left in their coffers for their campaign gets rolled over into a PAC, a political action committee, which is used to help get that establishment candidate elected, or in this case, reelected. So what I would tell you, anyone that is out there, well, you can't because you're not a citizen, so you can't donate to it. But to anyone, any American watching this, and really to any Australian that sees these similar patterns happening with, so-called anti-establishment liberal and labor candidates, I would tell you the same thing. Don't give these folks a penny more. If you want to vote for them in your primaries or whatever else, fine. But don't give them a penny more or a phone number or email address more than you would want to see eventually used to get Joe Biden elected or reelected.
RFK to me feels a little bit different because Bernie Sanders, obviously one of the biggest frauds ever to cave the way he did after what they did to him with the Hillary campaign.
Twice.
RFK does feel a little different in that he has now made himself, the enemy of the state, the media, the everything. Not only with during COVID with like the real Anthony Fauci book when it was extremely unpopular to say all of that stuff. But even now, like he is treated like an absolute outcast leper by anyone in the like the establishment circles. I don't know. I mean, look. He may end up disappointing incredibly, but it feels different is kind of I suppose the point that I'm hoping.
I would say, well, he's definitely different than Bernie Sanders. I'm not going to dispute that at all. And if anything, he's almost like Tulsi Gabbard on steroids, and literally and figuratively. But what I will say is, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he really has that COVID and the COVID regime broke him and he became a true believer and understands inherently that this corporatist system is a mess on all fronts. But I haven't heard him explain I can tell you my story of how I went from being a neocon to an ANCAP. I haven't heard that story from him. I've just seen this like narrative shift. Like, well, now, I support, now I'm against gun control. Before I was very much in support of it. I wanted to abolish the Second Amendment, eliminate all gun rights. Now, not so much. Now I'm good with that. I wanted to extend the lockdowns because then, we could turn them into climate change lockdowns. But now I'm completely against that. That was all terrible. So I hope that I'm wrong and that this is all a real thing. I'd like to hear that story as to what changed with him. But I'm also seeing, like, he was against the decision that said that universities couldn't discriminate on race using, affirmative action. I think if he were in Australia, he'd be a very big proponent of the voice. I don't know that for certain, but affirmative action is the voice. So I he is to this day a stalwart supporter of the Israeli military-industrial complex, which is really just an extension of the U.S. Military-industrial complex and the sort of apartheid status quo that Israel has. And I'm Jewish, if anyone wants to call me anti-Semitic for saying that. But there are little hints of things he says where I'm like, you're still a progressive liberal, but maybe he's a progressive liberal who's starting to get it. I may be completely wrong. My prediction, which I hope I'm wrong, but my prediction is that he'll get railroaded. I think that's almost certain. And then after he gets railroaded, he will make some kind of statement about how, Trumpism is the greatest threat to our democracy. And, President Biden has promised to address some of these issues, blah, 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 blah. And then, he does the endorsement. I hope I'm wrong. I would love nothing more than for him, when he gets railroaded, to either announce he's running as an independent or say, I'm not endorsing anyone and this whole system's a mess, or he endorses the libertarian or whatever. Like I would love for him to truly go rogue. I don't think he's going to, but I anytime I'm wrong, I'm happy that I'm wrong, because usually I'm predicting something terrible is going to happen.
One other thing I wanted to ask you, sorry to divert away from the US
go
for
ahead.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So I've because obviously, we're all in the same game, right? You much more established and successful, but we're all trying to get people we know or our friends or people that we don't know to subscribe to our views, to our ideology. And I have a friend who recently listened to a couple of the episodes that we did and found that he agreed with everything we were saying about the education system and about money and stuff. And he found himself getting enraged and at the injustice of it all. And he asked me this question, and it's a question that we also ask ourselves, and it's given that all of this is what's happening, given that the world is so messed up, and he's probably not someone who's likely to join the party or become an activist or whatever. But what can an individual person who sees how messed up all of it is, sees their wealth diminishing in ways that they can't control, being exploited, what can they do to defend themselves now? What's the step now that the average person can take if they are aware of what's happening?
So I tend to break it down into three things, and they all kind of boil into how do we spread the message most effectively? Because that's really where we are right now. We have to get more people behind our ideas and our solutions so that we can then implement them. We're not at implementation stage yet, right? So the first thing that I would say is get involved locally. Go to your city council meetings or your township meetings or whatever they're called in your area. You don't have counties, right? Okay, no. So we have a subdivision between city and state. So our states are broken into counties, which are then usually there are cities inside of those counties. So you don't have some intermediate between that?
Well, we have they're like electorates at when we vote. But yeah, I guess they kind of.
But those are just electoral districts for the different candidates. Okay, so get involved locally, and then maybe even at the state level, but especially locally. And the easiest way to do that is to just start showing up to local city council meetings. And what you're going to do, two things are going to happen. You're going to go there. You're going to probably get bored until you start hearing the subtext behind some of the stuff they're doing. And you're going to realize that they are just casually screwing you over every day. And that's going to enrage. You're going to go from bored to enraged. But another thing's going to happen. You're going to meet other people who show up to those meetings who aren't just there to hear what's happening. They're there because the government's ruining their life in some way. And they're going to just basically beg them to stop doing it. They don't know anything else to do. They've already lost all hope. They're just going there saying, please stop this. Stop trying to take my property. Stop taxing me out of existence. Stop, forcing my children into something terrible. Like whatever it is, stop taking my newborn child, whatever that thing is that they're going there for, right? And so when you go there, you've now identified someone who you don't have to convince that government is a problem because they're literally there fighting it. They might consider themselves Green Party voters. It doesn't matter. They recognize that government's hurting them. You have solutions to that. The solution is usually the government backs off, but you have someone that you can work with who already agrees with you on that one thing. And then now you have your platform that you can build from. You can now work with that person and other people who show up and your social media connections and your local connections to build a movement around that. You can, and the movement doesn't have to be millions of people. The movement could literally be dozens of engaged people at the local level who are determined to do the right thing with this, to force local officials to pay attention to this and to stop doing whatever they're doing to harm that person. You are now a local community leader who is building a movement of people who agree with you on one thing and want to move forward with that. And when you succeed on that thing, then you move on to the next one, and then you move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. Eventually people are bringing stuff to you. That's what I do with You Are the Power. I'm not trying to convince someone to become a libertarian. I'm just trying to show them that this thing we already agree on, we have the best solution, and here's how you can join us to help. So that's the first thing. Second thing is always be demonstrating the harm caused by the status quo and contrasting it with the good that would come from our solutions, right? And you can do that in that activism we were just talking about. The harm caused by the status quo is this thing that we're already all in agreement about. The solution is this proposal that we already agree on. Oh, by the way, that's libertarianism. That's free market. That's the non-aggression principle. That's human respect. That's the government using the same level of respect for us as individuals that they would if they weren't operating as in their capacity as government. That's what we believe in. The third thing I will tell you is, going back to that second thing, we often tend to focus on the principle behind something. Most people either don't want to hear that first. They want to hear that you care and that they want to hear that you have a solution that works. Then maybe they'll be interested in the underlying principle or foundation behind it. Most people will literally never care about that. If they think that you care and that you have a solution that works, none of that matters to them. They just don't care about that. You think of the average Green voter. Why do they vote Green? Because Greens care. Greens have, and maybe they think the solutions work, but Greens care more than everyone else. Why? Because Greens say they care more than anyone else. And meanwhile, we're over here talking about our principles. So start with, I care. I have a solution to this, and here's why it will work. And then if people are interested to hear the principle behind why that works, then you can share it with them, but most are not. We have to get over ourselves on that. The third thing I will tell you is, and this is possibly the toughest of all of these, you cannot become black-pilled and hopeless. You cannot let this eat you up. If you look at activists who become angry and bitter, what happens with them? They either fail or they create a movement of angry people who just want to burn it all down. I remember the riots of 2020. It started with people saying we need to hold bad police accountable, and we're seeing this harm that's happening in our communities. We need to do something about it. But it got led by people who went, "There's no hope. Everyone's racist. Might as well burn it down. We don't own it anyway." Right? Oh, also vote for Joe Biden, whose policies created all this. But so it's because they didn't have a hopeful vision of what they were going to do. They just, let's just burn it down. So if you're going to be black-pilled, you're going to either lose, people aren't going to want to have anything to do with you, or you're going to lead a movement of people who destroy and who end up going to prison or something like that. And also you'll be miserable, and your tyrants who oppress you every day would love nothing more than for you to be miserable, because they know you'll burn yourself out. You need to be happy. You need to be joyful. Ron Paul has a smile on his face. I used to get so angry when I would hear what Dr. Paul had to say about the military-industrial complex, but I could never get mad at him because he's this old, kind grandpa with a big smile on his face. He's delivered 1 million kids or whatever. Like he's this old man. Oh, you can't do that. This isn't going to work. We need sound money. How do you hate someone like that? You want to be someone that people love despite the fact that they disagree with you. Like you have to become someone who exudes hope and who exudes a plan that can actually fix this. And if you don't believe that you can actually fix this, then maybe you shouldn't be the person at the front. Maybe you should be the person who's just doing the work for the people that can do that to help them get their reach out there. Because our front-facing people need to be people who are full of hope and energy and a joy and an infectious joy that reaches other people. So if you can do those three things, you can be a leader in your community and you can spread liberty more than you might ever think.
But the black pills, I mean, they can still be the soldiers. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a libertarian movement anywhere in the world that doesn't have the black pilled soldiers in the back lines.
And I have plenty of people who, you know, are supportive of what I do. They're a part of You Are the Power. They are, you know, part of my online army of grassroots trolls across the various social medias. And they don't think that there's any hope, and that's okay. That's where they are right now. Some of them have changed, but some of them may never change. But they also recognize that they're at the very least, they're getting behind people who do have hope. Even if they think I'm an overly optimistic fool, even they understand that you're going to have to get behind people who do have hope, because that's what attracts more people to this movement. Even if they end up becoming black-pilled themselves, they at least have to have something that they have hope behind. If we go to people who are frustrated with the status quo as it is, and we go, yeah, it all sucks, there's nothing we can do about it, and they turn around and go, okay, and then, you know, I already thought that. They're not going to join you. They're just going to go, yeah, you're right, that sucks, I'm not going to do anything. Thanks for verifying that I shouldn't do anything, right? Like, it's not, no one joins the movement of angry people who don't want to do anything. Actually, that's not true. People do join that movement. They're not the people you want joining the movement.
All right. Well, we are at the past the hour mark there. I think we've gone through a lot there. I could ask you 200 more questions, but we try to keep our episodes at the 1 hour mark for our
sure,
for our poor listeners. Before we do finish up, was there any last thought, any last questions, Max or Spike? Anything you wanted to mention? Anything you wanted to comment?
Did you have one more question, Max?
I've got two quick fire questions for you, or one quick fire question. Favorite politician in the US current, outside of the Libertarian Party, and least favorite?
Most favorite as in an elected official or just a candidate?
Elected official.
I would probably have to go with Thomas Massey. Yeah, probably have to go with Thomas Massey.
And where's he
talking
based?
Federal. I'm sorry?
What state's he from?
He is a congressman out of he represents one of the districts in Kentucky.
Okay. And least favorite? This could open a big can of words. Man.
I mean, that's like, there's this whole list of people that are terrible. And so honestly, the first one that just popped into my head, and I'll just go with that, is cocaine Mitch McConnell. So Mitch, also from Kentucky, ironically. Kentucky is just, it's all best or worse there. And the reason I say that is, if I had to pick one person who has been most instrumental in taking a movement that is trying to limit government, funneling them into the Republican Party, and then immediately dashing their hopes of anything even resembling the sort, in the last 20, 30 years, it's Mitch McConnell. He's been whenever the Republicans are in charge of the Senate, he's been the majority leader. And he's basically been the most important Republican in DC for quite some time. Even more so in many cases than Donald Trump. It was, you know, Mitch McConnell was one of those people whispering in Donald Trump's ears and getting him to sign off on trillions of dollars in debt and 15 days to slow the spread and all of that nonsense. And you know, so yeah, no, I'd probably have to go with him, because most of the biggest government politicians don't lie about it. Like, they're just, I want more government because I think it's better, and you're a racist if you don't agree with me. Well, at least you're being honest about your intention. You know, Mitch McConnell will try to pretend to be some kind of constitutionalist, and he's nothing of the sort.
Mitch McConnell's the old fella who had the little computer frozen episode the other week, isn't he?
Yes, who literally just froze up. Yeah. So that's called sundowning. And it is very common of people that are, from what I can see, it looked like sundowning. Unless for some reason he just saw something that scared him and decided to stop talking. I don't think that's what happened. I think he completely lost. If you've ever lost your train of thought, you know what it's like where you're like, well, whatever that is. Imagine if you lost your thought. Like, you lost your what am I doing here? I think I'm pretty sure who I am. I not sure what's going on. I'm not even sure what to say. I don't think he had. Some people were saying he had a stroke or something like that. I don't think it was a stroke.
Saw something that scared him. Might have been the white light or the Grim Reaper, I think.
Yes, I'm coming soon, Mitch. No, I think it was just. I think he just sundowned in front of us. I mean, we've seen Joe Biden do it a few times, but nothing. I've never seen Joe Biden just stop talking for like 40 seconds and have to be kind of escorted off. That was I mean, it could have been a stroke, but I'd sooner think he's slowly leaving us cognitively.
When Biden does it, it's hard to tell if he is like maybe losing it or if he's just dreaming of ice cream.
If that's just him, that's the problem. Is he's always kind of been a goofball. So that's a good point. It is hard to tell, but I've never seen him just straight up be talking and then be like. I have heard him talk and go. He'll say, "Oh, have you ever wanted?" I remember there was a time and he said, "Have you ever just wanted so much to and you." Well, anyway, that was a mild sundowning. That was a mild sundowning. But I've never heard Joe Biden go, and that's what. I've never heard that, but maybe that's coming. Who knows?
Well, look, like Mitch McConnell's been helping the state to grow in throughout his whole career while pretending to be the opposition, and now he's helping Joe Biden look more competent by still continuing to be the opposition and having a worse gaffe than him.
True to form, Mitch McConnell, always trying to make the Democrats look better. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
One last final thing for me. If any of our listeners are listening on Spotify and not watching on YouTube at all, please go to YouTube and have a look at Spike's background behind him. And for any future guests who may potentially be listening, the stage is set. Beat that background.
Yeah. The baseline is now here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Spike, for your time. It's been fantastic. For those of us who don't already, please like us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube. We're now on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. Do all of that, please. That would be fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We will catch you next time.
Cheers, mates.
Thanks, Spike.
Cheers, mate. Howdy, partner.
Oh, I love saying that.